Hey, everybody, this is Josh for another episode of the Solopreneur Grind Podcast. I am here with Philip from Tech Thursday. Philip, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah. Hey, Josh. Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
Awesome. Can you start, Philip, just by telling everybody a little bit more about yourself and your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So, uh, I run a company called Tech Thursday. Tech Thursday, we host weekly events every single week in both Winnipeg and Calgary, and we're sort of looking to launch nationally as well across Canada. So, we're exploring Edmonton and Ottawa, hopefully launching there come April, and looking at a few more cities after that. So, yeah, Josh, you want me to jump into the backstory as well of Tech Thursday and kind of how we got here?
Yeah, I'd love to hear kind of how you got into it. I mean, especially these days, post COVID, everything's virtual. Like, I love the idea of in person stuff. So I'd love to hear the story of kind of how it came to be.
Yeah, totally. I think it's a bit of an interesting story and sort of like a unique sort of wave of how I got here and being able to do this full time. I was so previous to running Tech Thursday full time, had joined Neo on the Neo Financial on the really early team. So I think we were about 50 employees when I joined Neo, and we just raised our Series A. We had about 3,000 cardholders, and I joined as one of the first three employees on the customer experience team. And it was sort of my role to like, okay, we have 3,000 cardholders. We had just signed the deal with Hudson's Bay to take over their credit card program. You got to come in, build all the processes, implement phone support, and get the team ready to onboard 500,000 customers in I think it was something like 4 months or something crazy. So did that, built the team to about 50, and uh, was able to onboard all those customers. And once I'd done that, we'd successfully raised our Series B. And so the broader team was now about 300 people, but we knew we wanted to grow it to about 800 in the world of like fast-paced startups, 800 by yesterday. And so I took on the role of leading the talent marketing team. And so in that role, we built out a whole strategy of how to build our employer brand, how to get more people to want to work for us, and how do we scale kind of our inbound applicants. And so part of that strategy, of course, was social and paid ads, but a big part of it was events. And so when we sort of looked around, and also I'll say we really saw our competitive advantage coming out of the pandemic as being in person, being able to compete with the big banks. We wanted to move quickly, have an in-person work environment. And so we were hiring for offices in Winnipeg and Calgary specifically. And so we kind of looked around and said, like, there are not a lot of events, certainly in Winnipeg, not a lot of events in general, but in Calgary as well, not a lot of events that targeted senior members of the tech ecosystem. There were a lot of sort of hiring fairs and career for kind of, early startups, but nothing that really brought out like senior engineers or senior marketers, folks who are really kind of building incredible things in these ecosystems. And so what we decided to do was start this event series called Tech Thursday that would be every single week, panels, and bring this kind of group of people together. And honestly, it was because we wanted to hire them, and we wanted to sort of get in front of them and convince them to work at Neo. Um, and so that's what we did. We launched Tech Thursday. They started off super slow. 5 or 10 people would come out every week, and then they grew. And now in both of our markets, we have about 150 people coming out every week. And it got to the point where Neo was able to hire. We kind of achieved our goals. We were able to hire 800 people. The team was 800 people strong. And at a certain point last year, we sort of looked around and said, "Well, look, we don't need to hire as much as we did before." And Tech Thursday is now a revenue positive marketing channel for Neo. We had brought on some other sponsors. So we're kind of like, what do we do with this? What should we do with this entity? And I said, well, you know what? I kind of love doing this. Why don't I put in a proposal to spin it out as its own company and sort of take my leave from Neo and go and try and spin this off and run this full time. So I put in a proposal that the founders were keen on. And in July of 2024, we were able to spin it out as its own company. So we've now been doing this for a few months now, a little bit more than 6 months. Um, and it's been awesome. So the kind of first 6 months, we're getting our feet under us. And now it's all about, yeah, how do we grow and build and expand to more cities and support maybe the broader Canadian tech ecosystem largely.
Very, very cool, and probably an underappreciated type of preneurship, we'll call it, which is like intrapreneurship, right? Where you kind of like build a business within a business, and then in your case, having the courage to go take it to the founders and say, "Hey, can I spin this off?" Which is so cool. You talked about the size of the events, extremely impressive. Do you think that there's a lot of room for growth in-person stuff right now? Like if there's some listeners out there who are like, I miss in person, I love in person, in terms of starting a business from scratch, what do you think about that?
Yeah, certainly. I think this like might be kind of like tin hat y, but in my view, like I think there's going to be a large. We've already seen a large sort of resurgence of in person events, and I do think we've like quietly secularized as like a North American society over the last couple of decades, where we're just like slowly stop going to church and slowly like stop seeking community in person, and it's largely been replaced by online community, which I don't think is scratching the itch of very many people. And so what I've seen happen, I'm also involved in some weekly run clubs as well that have also grown tremendously. And I think what's happening is as a society, we're sort of saying, hey, online is no longer a great way of building really strong, lasting relationships. And there's like a keenness to build community in person and build relationships in person. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to start to build relationships and also build businesses that are based around sort of in-person connections. And I think also with, you know, the applications of AI broadly, we're going to start to see a lack of trust in terms of information and content that we see online. And I think people are going to start to uh, sort of shift their habits of like instead of seeking information or relationships or content online, really start to shift that towards getting getting that information source from in-person events and meet and doesn't necessarily have to be events either, but coffees and dinners and just meeting folks in person. So certainly I do see that as an opportunity for a lot of folks and seeing some really cool companies like across North America of folks who are doing similar things. So yeah, I think it's an awesome opportunity and people, I've seen people capitalize on it really well.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, it's the classic kind of like pendulum situation too, right? Where COVID knocks everyone online, all this tech comes out, everything becomes very online, online, online. And as you said, now it's kind of swinging back. People are looking for that in person. There's added trust, like you said, that with the AI piece. So I totally agree. Let's say there's somebody listening right now and they want to start an in-person event business, or better yet, maybe they were in a position that you were in. They're working at a company and the company's thinking of, or they're thinking of suggesting this and said, hey, Neo did this so successfully. Why don't we do this as well? What would you say are like 3 to 5 key steps you would take to replicate, or knowing what you know now, 3 to 5 steps you would recommend for somebody to get this off the ground?
100%. I would say, uh, number, number one is in like community. There's like very little individual almost. Like, I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but it's like really not about you or not about uh, your ability to do it. It's about your ability to bring people together. And so I think understanding that is important. And so understanding also like who should you, who should you tap and get them involved and make them feel like they're a part of this community. Really important. So like for us, a key pillar of our growth at Tech Thursday is like, um, one is our panelists are always going to bring in a crowd. So like understanding kind of like who, uh, who they are, who they're going to be able to bring in. If you want a certain audience, think about also like, can I co-host this with a brand or a company that has that audience that we want to get in front of? And so that's like an awesome way of saying, okay, cool. We really want to get in front of uh, engineers. Let's say, okay, well, there's this community group who is doing something similar, but maybe like don't have access to the platform that we've built. So maybe I'm going to offer them the opportunity to be a co-host, bring in like some of their members as panelists, and that's going to give us access to a new audience and a new group. And so not necessarily thinking like this is only my audience that I have to grow. And I do, it's really not about that. It's about who else can we bring in? It's not a fixed pie at all. It's you can grow the pie, and so by bringing in more people, you're able to kind of grow that pie. And then I'll say like, also I think like a bias to action is maybe the most important thing for any entrepreneur or people trying to start something. Like if you feel like there is a gap in the market that's not being addressed, the best thing you could do is like just try and fill it, and a bias action of just like, hey, this is what we want to do. This is what we want to accomplish. Uh, it's like pretty incredible the buy-in that you can get just by like having a bit of vision and like a bias to action of like, we're going to do this. We're going to put this event series together. Do you want to be a part of it? And so many people will be like, yeah, that's awesome. That's great. And then maybe the third thing is like, don't be afraid to ask people if they want to be involved, if they want to participate. I mean, Josh, you know this, right? Like you sent me a cold email and I said, yes, I'll come and join your podcast. And, people love talking about themselves. So that's the other thing for like event organizers and like podcasters too, is like, yes, once you get a bit of traction, it's like pretty easy to get people you wouldn't expect to want to participate in your panels because you have a bit of track record, and people are always really keen to come and lend their advice and share about themselves and what they're doing.
Yeah, it's great advice. It's funny how much overlap there is to all of that, to podcasting, right? Leveraging other people's audiences, really knowing who you're going to target, that kind of stuff. So great advice there. What would you say was the hardest part of building? I'll call it a company. Now it is a standalone company, right? But maybe the hardest part was at the beginning when it was still part of Neo. But what would you say was the hardest part?
Yeah. I mean, not the hardest part, but like one very important thing to keep in mind when you're kind of in this space is making sure that like the existing community feels like they're a part of this. Because what you don't want to happen is like, you don't want to, and especially now when we're looking at launching new cities, we don't want to sort of land in a city and people feel like we're the outsiders. Like we really want like a critical mass of people to feel like they're a part of this new event series that's popping up. Because as soon as you're kind of the outside, like this is really community based, right? And so if people are trying to push you out, that's like not a good place to be as an organizer. So like you certainly want people to feel like they're part of it. But I think, in the events business, and I'm sure like in the podcast business as well, the hardest part is like creating a sustainable business model. And that's really because events historically are really expensive. And I don't want to like give too much of a tech flair to this, but you almost have to think about events in first principle where like you have to really think like, what's the core thing that's bringing people together here? And so often other event organizers are like, we need incredible food and we need this to be like recorded with like top of the line, so videographers, or we need to bring in a social team. And none of that is what brings people together, right? And so we try and do that every single week where we keep our events as simple as possible. We only want people who are coming for the topic itself. Uh, and we try and strip away everything else. And it allows us to keep our events really cheap because the only things that are filling the room is essentially the topic and the speakers who are speaking to that topic. And then within that as well, like when you break down the kind of the revenue streams of an event, it's like ticket sales. We don't sell any tickets. We're always free. And it's not that we couldn't sell tickets. It's just like we don't really see why we would if it's not like necessarily a huge revenue driver for us. Like it's even if you did charge $10 a ticket, that's really not going to bring anything in. And so then it becomes a sponsorship model. And on the sponsorship model, it's okay. How do we convince people of this vision that we have for the Canadian tech ecosystem? How do we convince people that um, in person is like the best way for them to get their brand in front of a community? And this whole like community marketing sort of faction is like I do think brands are starting to realize how important it's going to become in sort of the coming years. But it is still you're still convincing, you know, marketing teams who are like so based on like return on ad spend or ROI that like getting in front of the community is really important. When like yeah, most of them are built on like if I'm putting $10,000 behind a paid ad, I'm gonna have like 10 new users. Or like the metrics are like so bad on paid ads. I'm so surprised people are so diehard. But that is one of the things like you got to kind of convince some of these companies that this should be baked into their growth models.
For sure. I have a selfish question as a Canadian who's living in the GTA. I notice your list of current locations and prospective locations doesn't include Toronto or Vancouver. Is there a reason that you're avoiding those two big metropolitan cities? Are there enough events there? Like, why not the two big names?
Yeah. So that's an awesome question. Certainly not avoiding them. I think the answer is when we do launch those cities, we want to make sure that we do them right. I think there are some great events happening in those spots, but I do think from what we've understood from those markets, there's still opportunity to have more events, and we do have some plans. I think we do want to be in Toronto for Toronto Tech Week in June, so you can kind of expect us then. But I think to us right now, what's really important is a lot of these a lot of these mid-market Canadian tech cities are very insular. Josh, I'm not sure if you've ever been to Calgary, but Calgary is like so rah-rah, like our tech scene is incredible. We're growing tremendously. And it is like by a lot of senses it is, but like outside capital, when they think about making Canadian investments, they only care about Toronto or Vancouver, for example. And like maybe some care about Montreal. Uh, and so what sort of happens is these tech communities are very insular, which is great because it encourages a lot of entrepreneurs and founders to build companies in these cities. It encourages a lot of early employees to like seek jobs in tech as well. But I think it underserves the ecosystem because they're so insular. And so for us, what we're trying to do is expand to more uh, mid to small market tech ecosystems that are very strong, but are very insular and start to break down those barriers where we're making connections between tech cities. So if we can introduce a founder in Ottawa to like their first engineer hire in Edmonton, that's like a huge win for us. And then I think, and also if what that means is we can start to represent these tech companies to either outside investors or to like talent in Toronto or Vancouver, I think that's also a big win for us too. So start to we want to start to build our network and our markets by starting with these very like insular, underrepresented tech hubs before going into like Toronto and Vancouver. But we will go to Toronto for sure this year, at least for a one-off event, and then Vancouver. Vancouver, we're not sure. Vancouver is interesting. It's like very like uh, every time yeah. Anyway, we might do Vancouver soon, but it's like not necessarily on the roadmap anyway.
Sounds good. I won't hold you to it. I was very quickly in Calgary. We flew in and we quickly drove to Banff and spent I want to say like a week and a half in that area, which is just beautiful, especially coming from flatland Ontario. Totally beautiful. So I will have to make a return and do a little bit more exploring. Philip, my last question is, let's say there's some entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs out there, or heck, maybe there's somebody who's working at a company like you were, and they have an idea like you did, or they got an opportunity to start something inside of a bigger company. What's the one key piece of advice you would give to that person right now?
Now's the time to do it. Uh, yeah, I think now's the time to do it. We're both like, we're both in a position as the Canadian economy where there's something like 100,000 fewer entrepreneurs than there were 20 years ago in Canada. And which is like not a stat that probably encourages people to like go like, okay, time to start a company. Uh, but I do think what it does indicate is there's a huge need right now for a sort of a cultural shift towards entrepreneurship. And I think existing entrepreneurs see that and are very willing to help anyone who wants to take that leap. Like as Canadians, I think we need to start filling that gap and creating both incredible like small businesses and like lifestyle businesses, but we also need to be creating more and more billion-dollar companies right here in Canada. And so, if you have the idea or you want to do it, I think the piece of advice is like the one, uh, uh, now's the time to do it. Just do it, but also there's like tremendous networks of people who are willing to help you out. And so just seeking advice will land you probably like way more help than you think is out there for you right now.
I totally agree. And yeah, Canadians are friendly, right? So in more ways than
Yeah,
just one, especially to entrepreneurs. So Philip, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show, sharing the story, super interesting, sharing the advice. People do want to learn more about you or the company or maybe get in touch. Where do you recommend that they go?
absolutely. I would feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Follow Tech Thursday on LinkedIn as well. And we also publish the Calgary Tech newsletter and the Winnipeg Tech newsletter. So if you want to follow along on kind of the our ecosystems and what we're up to, I would follow those too.
Awesome. And we will provide links to Philip's LinkedIn profile and the websites as well in the description, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcast platform. Philip, thanks again for coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries at all. Josh, thank you so much for having me.